That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, so obviously the NFL draft did not just impact these rookies that we will talk about, some of them in this video, but also it had a major impact on a lot of veterans. So I know a lot of people got to see our April rankings, and we updated those over there on Locals. We are going to dive into our May rankings now and primarily focus in on the wide receivers that lost value. So we'll be talking about players like AJ Brown. We'll be talking about someone like Devonta Smith. I'm going to be excited to dive into this, even though I know we'll get some hate for it, but please make sure to go down there, drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football, leave a comment letting me know how stupid I am, and let's go right into this. Let's dive into a wide receiver in AJ Brown that I won't talk too much about because I know we either just had a video posted on our Dynasty channel talking about him or it's coming very soon. But from a 2022 fantasy football perspective, I want to acknowledge something. With AJ Brown, while he may be plummeting in my rankings, he is still an elite level talent. Oh, okay, I can admit that. With AJ Brown, say if he was traded to the Green Bay Packers, like imagine if the Packers go out there and they send their 2 first-round picks to get AJ Brown and Tennessee sends back their second rounder. Like, dear God, AJ Brown at that point, after that trade, we would be valuing him higher than Diggs. He would be a top 5 wide receiver in these rankings. He would be right after Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase. But going to the Philadelphia Eagles is just devastating. We've talked about this at length, but this is a Philadelphia Eagles team that, I said it before the NFL draft, I think that they are a sneaky favorite to potentially win this division. I mean, if Jalen Hurts manages to take a step forward going into his second year starting, which I'm not saying is a guarantee. Now I'll say he'll be able to take the step forward from a fantasy football perspective based on these weapons, but I like this Eagles team overall. However, the passing volume simply is not going to be there. With the Philadelphia Eagles, they were a bottom 5 team in passing yards last season. They were only ahead of teams like the Carolina Panthers, like the New Orleans Saints. It was embarrassing how bad of a passing offense this was. I'm sure anybody who was starting Devonta Smith regularly knew this. I had Dallas Goedert in a couple leagues, and I was pulling my hair out because of it. But that should change just slightly. I think the efficiency of this passing offense should be able to take a step forward because you have Devonta Smith going into year 2. You have AJ Brown, one of the best, whatever you want to call him, a very good wide receiver coming over from Tennessee. So we can all get on board with the efficiency of this passing offense taking a step forward combined with Jalen Hurts going into his second year starting. Now, my issue with Philadelphia is I don't necessarily think the issue in Jalen Hurts getting to 250 passing yards on a regular basis was due to the lack of efficiency of the offense. I think it was due to this coaching staff. If you go through and look at pass attempts per game here, the Philadelphia Eagles were last. Jalen Hurts was last in the NFL in pass attempts. This is a team that even if this offense is able to become more effective, they're able to sustain more drives, they're able to have more trips to the red zone, they're able to put up more points. We are unsure if this team's going to use the addition of AJ Brown to skew significantly more pass happy, or maybe all of a sudden teams can't go through and stack the box. Teams can't send a linebacker to shadow Jalen Hurts. Instead, maybe they have to keep 2 safeties back, and the Philadelphia Eagles become a better team with AJ Brown in their ability to run the ball without necessarily having to dramatically change their passing attack. So this team can be a better offense overall without necessarily becoming a great passing option. I mean, we don't necessarily have to see the Philadelphia Eagles turn into 2019 Tampa. And this is concerning, in my opinion, because AJ Brown's going to an offense now that will have less passing volume than what he had in Tennessee, and at the same time, more target competition. In Tennessee, he was competing with an injured Robert Woods, a very injured Robert Woods. He was competing with God knows who at tight end. Even Anthony Furchker is gone. Now he's going up against Devonta Smith. He's going up against Dallas Goedert. So you're telling me there's going to be less passing volume overall. He's going to have more competition. That is horrendous. I mean, going over to Underdog Fantasy right now, you're looking at A.J. Brown as a wide receiver that's going off the board at wide receiver 9. He's going ahead of T. Higgins. He's going ahead of Mike Evans. His ADP is 21. That's in the middle of the second round. That's almost an entire round ahead of Evans. I personally have A.J. Brown down there at wide receiver 12. I instead have Mike Evans over him. I have Keenan Allen over him. I have T. Higgins over him, and they're in a tier above as well. I don't see an argument on why A.J. Brown should be going this early in underdog drafts. Now, of course, if you want to go hop into an underdog draft, make sure you go use promo code FLOCK on Underdog Fantasy. Hop into a draft with me on a live stream. Hop into a draft with your friends. Go hop into a draft with the public lobby. Whatever you want to do, go use promo code FLOCK. You'll get all our 2022 rankings. On top of this, you'll get our Dynasty Rookie Draft Guide, and you'll get a 100% deposit match with promo code FLOCK. Please go support the channel that way. Get in a live stream with us. Go have some fun. Now, let's move on to our second wide receiver on this list. Let's go over to Deontay Johnson. Now, Deontay Johnson, he was a player that we made a video before the NFL draft. I was saying, you know what? We want to be drafting Deontay Johnson aggressively. You go through and you look at the amount of targets he was able to draw over the past 2 seasons. He's one of the most targeted wide receivers in the entire NFL. He's in his prime as well. So I was looking at Juju Smith-Schuster leaving, the volume he had, and saying he was a top 10 option in fantasy football. Well, this team goes out there and they draft George Pickens. That clearly is going to hurt Deontay Johnson, in my opinion. It will hurt him enough to move him behind someone like Jalen Waddle. I mainly just want to include him on this list because I know we are getting a ton of questions about him. I am still not moving Deontay Johnson below players like DJ Moore, below someone like DK Metcalf. And with Deontay Johnson, I am still higher on him compared to consensus. Like if we pull up ADPs right now, Deontay Johnson going to get pick 38 in these underdog drafts compared to DK Metcalf at pick 31. And with Deontay Johnson, while I will admit the addition of George Pickens is not good, George Pickens should be good enough in this offense to be able to have a role and command volume. And Deontay Johnson's never going to be a super efficient player. You're banking on the fact that Deontay Johnson can get 10 targets a game. Now, what I will say is, love that they add Kenny Pickett. Now, I don't necessarily think Kenny Pickett is going to be some great NFL quarterback. I don't think Kenny Pickett's going to come in and start right away. But what it does is it will raise the floor of the situation of this Pittsburgh Steelers passing attack. And that if we come out, start the season, and Mitchell Trubisky is horrible. Mitchell Trubisky shows that what his early career was like in Chicago wasn't because of Matt Nagy. It wasn't because of the situation. It was only due to the fact that he is not a talented quarterback and cannot get it done. Well, now the Pittsburgh Steelers have a second option. Now they can go through and they can take a second shot. So if we get through 4 or 5 weeks of the season and Deontay Johnson's dealing with horrible quarterback play, there's a safety net. Now, I'm not saying that that safety net is going to work, but it's better than nothing. It's like you're jumping out of an airplane, right? You're drafting Deontay Johnson and you're jumping out of an airplane hoping that your parachute's going to work. Your first parachute is Trubisky. You're saying, please just give me average quarterback play. You give me average quarterback play. I'm going to get home safely. You pull that parachute out. All of a sudden, there's a massive hole in it. You're like, oh, I should have never trusted Mitchell Trubisky. But thank God I at least have this second parachute. I can go over here to Kenny Pickett. I can rip that cord off. Now, I'm not telling you that there's no hole and that's the best parachute you're ever going to have. I'm not telling you you're 100% going to be landing on that ground safely. But what I will say is it's better to have that second parachute than to have no hope at all, to then just be screwed and plummeting down like we saw back in 2019 when you had guys like Mason Rudolph taking starts for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, let's move over to our next wide receiver. This is going to be someone we had a live stream after he got popped for PEDs, but we're going to go over to DeAndre Hopkins. Now, with DeAndre Hopkins, I currently have him ranked at wide receiver 21. I have him behind players like Amari Cooper, Hollywood Brown, Terry McLaurin. I have him directly ahead of the tier of Mike Williams, Michael Pittman, and Jerry Jeudy. Now, if you head over to Underdog Fantasy, you're going to see that DeAndre Hopkins currently being drafted as wide receiver 20. So I'm about right in line. And what I will say is, if you're watching this video just for fun and you're telling me, Mason, I'm not going to get in my 2022 drafts until August. I'm just going to be drafting in a regular league. That's not best ball. That's not Underdog Fantasy. I don't want to have fun during the offseason, which you should. You should hop in some best ball drafts. But there, I'm actually going to be more pessimistic on DeAndre Hopkins. As we've already discussed previously, drafting those injured players at the beginning of your draft / players on suspension, players that will miss the beginning part of the season is a very bad idea, because with the way the fantasy football trade market works is it's easier to just avoid those players, be able to take a shot on a different wide receiver in the middle rounds. Instead, go draft yourself a Jerry Jeudy and try to get him to pop off. Try to have that hot start where all of a sudden you can possibly trade him for DeAndre Hopkins plus after you've had that production. Now, it's going to be a little bit different on Underdog Fantasy because, keep in mind, this is the $25 draft, the Best Ball Mania 3, that if you go into it and win your 12-man league or get second place in your 12-man league, congrats, you win some money. But what we are trying to do is we are trying to make it to that fantasy football playoffs. So you got to get first, second place in your 12-team league, but that's when the tournament starts. That's when you're entered into the large field of players. And from there, if you have access to that elite level ceiling, that's when the $2 million for first, the $1 million for second, the $500,000 for third, yada, 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 all the way down the line. That's when you need to have a potential 25-point game from DeAndre Hopkins. So if you're playing in a best ball underdog format, I'm going to be ranking DeAndre Hopkins here. I'll be taking him alongside Amari Cooper, Hollywood Brown, Terry McLaurin because of the upside near the end of the season. But if you're playing in your regular fantasy football league, you're telling me, you know what, Mason, my state doesn't allow underdog fantasy. I live in Hawaii. Maybe Louisiana still doesn't. I know Michigan doesn't. There are like 3 or 4 states that don't. If you live there and you're just watching this video for fun, then hell yeah, don't draft DeAndre Hopkins at all. Just trade for him in week 4. But let's go over to our next wide receiver, someone that had significant target competition added his way. Let's go over to Elijah Moore. So if you're checking out Elijah Moore on Underdog Fantasy, currently being drafted as wide receiver 24, I'm going to have him ranked a little bit lower than this. I'm going to be pushing Elijah Moore down to about wide receiver 27. I could easily be talked into having more higher than this. We currently have Michael Thomas and Darnell Mooney ranked directly before him. And my issue with Elijah Moore is I think it's entirely in the range of outcomes that you just get Garrett Wilson coming in and all of a sudden being the wide receiver 1 on this team. You look at that Garrett Wilson rookie profile. Garrett Wilson was a better prospect than Elijah Moore in almost every way imaginable. But keep in mind, in our wide receiver prospect model, we place such an emphasis on the target competition that you had in college. And Garrett Wilson went up against some of the toughest wide receivers to ever hit college football. I will say that. So I love me some Garrett Wilson. And my issue is if we're viewing Elijah Moore in the light where it's in the range of outcomes, by the time you get to the end of the season, he's the wide receiver 2 for the New York Jets. That is scary because why I will admit, trust me, I love what the Jets did in this year's draft. I think it's almost consensus at this point that if you go up and ask anybody on the street, you go, hey man, did you watch the NFL draft this year? What do you think? You know what that person's telling you? They're going, oh my God, the Jets killed it. Look at what the Jets did. Everybody loves what that organization is putting around Zach Wilson. I am still hesitant to say that this is going to be anything more than a below average offense this upcoming season. And that's because if you go through and look at how historically bad Zach Wilson's rookie season was, everybody can look at the fact that at the end of the season, he was significantly better. He definitely showed that improvement after his injury, which is what you needed to see. If you saw no improvement whatsoever, oh, trust me, Elijah Moore would be a lot lower than this. Everybody wants to look at that. Everybody also wants to look at the fact that you have some other, very few other quarterbacks that failed their rookie season to that extent and came out and showed us that they did take steps forward. They can go through and turn into that elite level quarterback. We got that from Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills, and everybody will always be pointing to that. It's very similar to how you can't say, oh, Malik Willis went in the 3rd round and then fell draft. That means you can't draft Malik Willis, and then you have everybody online going, does this idiot not know anything about Tom Brady? Can someone tell him where Dak Prescott? Can someone tell him where Russell Wilson was drafted? And they will ignore the hundreds and hundreds of those other players that don't fit their narrative and focus in on the 3 that do and think that they are so good and so smart and so talented that they can identify those outliers consistently. It's very similar with how bad Zach Wilson was his rookie year, where it's possible that he does become an above average NFL quarterback, but it is highly unlikely, historically speaking, based on his adjusted yards per attempt, which takes into account both touchdowns and interceptions, and obviously passing yards and passing attempts. So I personally am going to prefer Michael Thomas, where yes, Michael Thomas definitely has a lower floor. Not going to ignore that. Michael Thomas has a way lower floor than Elijah Moore does, but at the same time, Michael Thomas has the ceiling to be the wide receiver 1 in fantasy football. I'm going to prefer Darnell Mooney, where Darnell Mooney, in a very similar situation where I think the Chicago Bears and Justin Fields will most likely be a below average NFL offense. However, the difference between Darnell Mooney and Elijah Moore is there is approximately a 0% chance that Darnell Mooney is the wide receiver 2 for the Chicago Bears this upcoming season. You know he is locked into an elite level target share based on the idea that the number 2 option in that passing offense is currently Cole Kmet. I would love to know your opinion. I loved Elijah Moore coming out of Ole Miss, but we are going to move him down here at 27. And now getting over to our next guy, we are going to have Devonta Smith at wide receiver 31. Here, it's like you're looking at Elijah Moore, Devonta Smith. I think they are comparable talents. If we're going to be completely honest, Smith is probably slightly better. Now, the thing is, both offenses are probably going to be below average throwing the ball. But why I'm going to have Smith lower than someone like Elijah Moore, lower than Bateman, lower than Darnell Mooney, lower than Michael Thomas, lower than Treylon Burks, we have Treylon Burks over him as well, is with Smith, you're guaranteeing that he's the wide receiver 2 on his team. You're guaranteeing he's behind A.J. Brown. On top of this, if we compare that situation to the New York Jets, I'm expecting both passing offenses to be below average. But Devonta Smith will be the wide receiver 2. And on top of this, they have a more than capable, I would argue, a very good tight end in Dallas Goedert that will command targets in his own right. So Devonta Smith, while I want to believe that he is a very talented wide receiver, he posted at Alabama in 2020, quite possibly the best season ever from a receiver in college football. Like, go pull up that 2020 season from Devonta Smith at Alabama. The only way you can describe it is truly absurd, truly special. But still, I don't see the path to really any ceiling whatsoever outside of an A.J. Brown injury or outside of Jalen Hurts possibly becoming legitimately the quarterback 1 in fantasy overall. Because if you just think through this and you project out Jalen Hurts, say with his 50 rushing yards a game and with his 8 rushing touchdowns this upcoming season, for there to be enough passing volume in Philadelphia to support A.J. Brown to be a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 in fantasy, and at the same time to allow Devonta Smith to have access to a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 finish at the same time, Jalen Hurts would have to be like a top 10 passer in the NFL. And if he's a top 10 passer in the NFL and at the same time he's putting up rushing production that's in a similar league, it's not as much, but it's at least comparable to someone like Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts would be the number 1 quarterback in fantasy. So if you're going to draft Devonta Smith, I'm fine with it. If you want to take him as a low-end wide receiver 2, if you want to take him as a high-end wide receiver 3, go ahead. By all means, he's ranked as the wide receiver 28 on Underdog. I have him as the wide receiver 31. Just make sure you're stacking him with Jalen Hurts, because if Smith hits, Jalen Hurts had to go through the roof. Now let's go over to our next wide receiver that lost in value. And you better believe we're going to be talking about a rookie here. We are going to go over talk about Jameson Williams. Now with Jameson Williams, let's compare him to some of our other rookie rankings. Of course, in dynasty leagues, these players are going to be ranked so much higher, but that's dynasty. We're talking 2022. Like our wide receiver rankings here, Treylon Burks 30, Drake London 33, Garrett Wilson 34. I have Jameson Williams all the way down at wide receiver 40 4, possibly moving lower than this. He's literally right next to Christian Watson, right next to Sky Moore, right next to Chris Olave, despite me believing that Jameson Williams is a better wide receiver by a wide margin than Sky Moore and Christian Watson. But the reason for this, you going over to the Detroit Lions with Detroit here. This is a passing offense very similar to what we've been talking about with all these other receivers. A below average offense overall, and at the same time with Jameson Williams, he can be the wide receiver 1 here. I'm expecting Amon-Ra St. Brown to actually outscore Jameson Williams his rookie season based on how Amon-Ra St. Brown operates in this offense compared to the role that Jameson Williams will have. But you have so much target competition. You have St. Brown. You have TJ Hawkinson. You have DeAndre Swift as well. And I'm assuming DJ Chark is nothing. I'm assuming that DJ Chark is legitimately just a non-factor in this offense, despite them paying him close to $10 million a year, if not $10 million a year. What's likely is Jameson Williams starts slow, misses rookie minicamp, misses training camp because of that injury, and DJ Chark possibly has the job day one. And it takes about a month into the season for Jameson Williams to take it over, despite him having the talent. Now, the issue is with the best ball format with Jameson Williams, going back to what we were talking about, so much money being dictated in the fantasy football playoffs in this format with so much on the line in weeks 15, 16, and 17. We know that he is one of the few wide receivers that will have the upside to possibly go out there and drop 25 to 30 points any given week based on his deep threat ability and based on the overall prospect he was coming in. So it's very comparable to someone like DeAndre Hopkins. If you were to be drafting these players in your regular league that you're just doing with your friends, it's not best ball, it's not Best Ball Mania 3 on Underdog, then I am probably moving Jameson Williams lower than this. It's just his raw upside and why I'm willing to keep him ahead of someone like Chase Claypool, keep him ahead of someone like Hunter Renfrow. But I think that should be it. Please let me know if you think I missed anybody in this video. Please go down there, drop a like on the video as well. And if you want to go have some fun with your life, go hop into some drafts on Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code FLOCK when you sign up and they'll match that deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. I appreciate you, and I really hope I get to see you with our next video.